Atomic Heart has been out for nearly a year, and with a bunch of updates and a couple of DLCs under its belt, I figured now would be the best time to give the game a revisit and a review. Mundfish Studio makes their debut with Atomic Heart, dropping back in February of 2023, with the game originally being conceived all the way back in 2017, so it had about 5 to 6 years of development time. The game would come out to a mix of positive and negative reviews, landing at a Metacritic score of 70 for its PS5 version, which is about as average as you can possibly get. It's now been over a year since the release, and the developers have put out a number of patches along with 2 DLCs of the promised 4, so there is even more content on its way. Now the question remains, should you buy Atomic Heart? The game is set in an alternate timeline where the Soviet Union had won World War II and placed humanity on a fast track to medical and technological advances that we can only dream of. Robots roam the city, helping in the daily lives of humans in a number of ways. The whole city feels like a utopia of some sorts, and the intro showcases both the beautiful graphics that the game bolsters, but also the vibrant and gorgeous art style. It really feels like the developers are just flexing their muscles for the first 30 minutes of the game. Now, in Atomic Heart, you play the role of Major Sergei Nechayev, who was a veteran of the war that was saved by a doctor named Dmitry Sechenov, and now serve as an agent to him. Sechenov is in charge of the Atomic Heart project, but due to what has become a large malfunction in the robot's programming, consequently has caused him to go rogue and start attacking humans, and that basically put the project's future in jeopardy. It then becomes your job to get to the bottom of this whole mess and make sure the Atomic Heart project goes on. The story of Atomic Heart has a very interesting premise. I personally like these types of games where the story is based on an alternate timeline of real world events. That being said, the characters in the game feel very weak and underdeveloped. The main character is just not likable. It's not often I say that about a game's protagonist, but he just truly isn't likable, and the way he's written largely contributes to that feeling. His remarks are almost always snarky and combative, even when he doesn't need to be. He kind of sounds like the same actor who played the male version of V in Cyberpunk 2077. However, I couldn't confirm that this was actually him. But even then, that couldn't save the character for me. It's not just him though. Most characters in this game have very little depth, and many just don't get enough screen time in between missions. Much of what you learn about this whole story is done through conversations you have with your experimental glove, otherwise known as Charles, and random audio logs scattered around the world. I think the game could definitely have done a lot more in this area because it has such a unique setup and vibe to it, but in my opinion, the execution ultimately fell short, and the story, while initially sounded like something I would have been interested in, became a slog for me to get through, as going from mission to mission had a large disconnect from the main story itself. So would I recommend a playthrough of Atomic Heart just for the story? No, that would be very hard for me to do so. The mission design in Atomic Heart is something that got pretty old to me about halfway through the game. See, most main missions will ask you to go and collect 3 or 4 different parts of something and come back to place them in a central location. For example, early on there is a mission to collect 4 canisters to power a door. Okay, I thought I can do that with no problem. What this essentially asks me to do is to go into 4 different sublocations and eliminate a room of enemies, do some puzzle solving, and maybe even stealth my way through and grab the object, then place it back to its original place. The problem arose when I had to complete the same objective time and time again. I really had hope for more variety, but the mission design is extremely simplistic. Sure, some rooms might have different puzzles and some might have larger groups or smaller groups of enemies, but going to collect things then backtracking again and again just wasn't fun, and not something I enjoyed doing after the 3rd or 4th time. That mission structure contributed to this overall feeling I had about this game and its lack of substance. Now, gameplay is where I think the game does well. At its very core, Atomic Heart is a first-person shooter with a couple of layers placed on top of it. Now, the game starts out with a simple axe used for melee, but not long after that you'll be expanding your arsenal of weapons featuring pistols, rifles, shotguns, and other types of ranged and melee weapons. I liked having these different weapon options because they gave the action both a breath of fresh air and a sense of strategy to apply based on enemy type. You also have access to powers that are supplied by your glove, like a shock ability, an ice ability, a shield, and more. Mixing all these different avenues to deal damage was a fun part of combat. If I ran out of shotgun bullets, I'd quickly zap an enemy to stun them, then run up and smash them with my axe. I also like that the combat was dynamic. There's a whole dodge mechanic as well, so combat sequences were generally very active, especially when being run down by multiple enemies. The gunplay feels good. Each gun has its own kick, so there's a nice variety there. However, there definitely are some hiccups that are very frustrating, like getting cornered by enemies and just being completely unable to move. This happened more times than I'd like to admit. In general, the melee combat feels less polished than the ranged options. Also, hitting an enemy doesn't have much of an impact. They barely react to your hits, and being hit by an enemy also isn't impactful unless you fail to dodge one of their red attacks. Sometimes I'd be getting hit without realizing that my health is being chipped away. With that being said, overall I thought the combat was solid. I definitely did take a liking to the ranged combat more than the melee. It is worth mentioning there's a decent variety of enemies, from flying drones to these robots who engage in melee and other robot types. These enemies usually require different strategies to take down, as they all have their own resistances and weaknesses. Now the game also features a weapon and ability upgrade system, and I think this offers some amount of depth. Having the option to specialize down a weapon skill path is a very welcome addition and offers a good sense of progression. These upgrades usually include damage increases or energy increases, and sometimes even changes the moveset of an item. The parts needed to craft these upgrades and craft blueprints are all found within the different areas that can be scavenged, which I must admit has to be one of the most satisfying looting systems out there. Walking into a room, holding R1 and completely vacuuming the room up was great, and honestly a nice solution to picking up materials in bulk rather than picking each item up one by one. Very cool addition, and it made looting a breeze. You can of course also upgrade your abilities and also your own stats, like increasing your health or your movement speed with the resources looted. I did like the progression systems that the game had. It's not super complex, but it's definitely something that allows you to experiment with different playstyles and switch it up whenever you feel like it. Now just to be clear, Atomic Heart is a semi-open world game, which kind of surprised me at first. I didn't think I'd have the ability to drive a car from point A to point B, stop and loot nearby buildings, and generally just roam around freely. There's this whole wanted system as well. If you're caught on camera attacking a robot, you'll raise the alarm to level 1, which will send some reinforcements after you. And if you raise it to the max of level 2, then you're getting bombarded with enemies. These open areas aren't brimming with side activities to do. Don't go in expecting a Far Cry or Assassin's Creed level of things to do. They mostly just exist as areas you can go into and pick up some resources. Your moment-to-moment experience does have a fair amount of variety in it. Outside of combat, you'll probably be solving some sort of door puzzle, vacuuming a room for materials, navigating some platforming puzzle, or searching for blueprints for your weapons. The puzzles that are in the game come in a few different forms. Some are really easy, like pressing X when a light goes over a node, and others are more challenging, like trying to line up the right colors to the right bulb. I might have room temperature IQ, but it would take me a bit to figure these specific ones out. I mention all this because the game does have a good variety of activities to do as you wander around. I've tried to refrain from saying this, but the game most closely reminds me of a less polished BioShock in a lot of ways, especially just the general gameplay and story elements. Graphically, the game oozes style. It has a very unique and attractive aesthetic to it. The opening scene is honestly probably one of the best I've seen in any game. It just looks so good. That same feeling lasted me the whole game. Whoever was in charge of the level design also clearly has a passion for it, because every room of every building had so much detail. To add to that, the animation quality in this game is absolutely fantastic. All the little interactions between the main character and the objects in the world are all just so well done. There is clearly a lot of production value here just based on the sheer quality of the look of the game. Atomic Heart really sets itself apart with its art style and quickly became my favorite part of the game. Now the sound of the game is just a mixed bag. I had a bug in the game where audio tapes that I found never actually played the audio out loud for some reason, and even restarting the game did nothing to fix this. The voiceovers in general were fine. It's just that a lot of the times characters would start talking over one another, both in cutscenes and just by walking around. I recall one specific time where my glove was talking to me and the upgrade machine was also talking to me, and it seemed like my character was trying to respond to both. I don't know, it was very chaotic, but this isn't a rare occurrence either. It happens quite often in the game. Now I have to give it up to the devs. There have been a number of patches and updates to the game showing that they clearly care about the game and the quality of the title, so I'll go through and highlight some of the biggest changes. The first patch added FOV settings. Yes, the game launched without FOV settings, believe it or not, and this was 90% of the reason why I originally avoided it. Another patch ended up adding 120Hz mode for PS5 and Xbox Series X, if of course your TV supports that. The June 7th update added a photo mode. I know some people love photo modes. The June 26th update was one of the largest, which added a new Game Plus mode and changes the way the game plays quite substantially, as enemies have new abilities and immunities. And the latest update added a bunch of accessibility features like the colorblind mode and auto QTE. All of this in addition to 2 DLCs. I mean, you gotta give the credit where it's due. There has been a nice stream of constant updates here. So let's finally wrap this review up. The phrase style over substance is a term that I feel fits this game perfectly. The game looks amazing, the art style is unique and eye-catching, but the actual depth that's there is fairly shallow. I really wanted to like this game, but the story is just bare bones. Given what's at stake, it just felt like we never get to know the characters involved very well. Everything sort of just happens with little explanation or reason as to why. The missions just feel completely disjointed from the story as well. The Soviet Union reputation is at stake, and the game has me going room to room, collecting robot parts and canisters for more than 60% of the game. There's just no sense of urgency or impact my actions had, which I would have liked to see. The combat is solid, the melee is serviceable, but some boss fights are very frustrating. The semi-open areas have some side objectives, but nothing that'll keep you busy for too long. All in all, the game is pretty short. I think it took me around 12 hours to run through the story, and that's even after doing some side content as well, like hunting for blueprints. For what the game offers, it's hard to recommend a playthrough of it because in my opinion, a game like Atomic Heart lives and dies by its story, and I just didn't find the actual execution of the story to be that interesting, although the initial premise was. So that wraps up my review of Atomic Heart. In the end, I just cannot recommend a playthrough of it. So that'll do it for this video. Thank you all for watching as always. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one.